All right, now that we have some basic knowledge of variables, what if you want to do something besides just printing input and output and executing statements straight down the line? So for one thing I might want to do is have my program do one thing if a particular condition is true and not otherwise. So this is where the real power of programming comes in, is the if statement. So the way an if statement works is you say if some particular thing, for example, I can say if input is 3, for example. I did use two equal signs, and I'll get back to that in a moment. So let's say that you put in a 3. And then I'll just output the input regardless of what it is. If I try this guy, so I'll say 3, you put in a 3. So by default, an if statement always executes the very next line if this thing inside of it evaluates to true. If it evaluates to false, then it doesn't do anything. Now another way of doing this, which I do all the time, is putting in braces around this thing here. So if I want to do more than one line in this if statement, so maybe I want to also add one to input, then I have to put braces around the section that applies in the if statement. As a matter of course, I will always put braces in after if statements, just because I never know when I'm going to need to put multiple lines in. So basically from now on, I will always put in braces. Just know that it is possible, if you only have one statement, to not use them. So now if I try this, oops, I should compile that. That would help. So I'll say 3 now. So you put in a 3, it's now 4 once I do that input plus plus. What if I want to do one thing or another though? So let's say that I want to put in a 3 if it equals 3, and I want to do something else if it's not. So then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to hit the right key. After this closing brace here, or after the one statement, I can put in an else statement. By the way, it's up to you whether you want to put the brace on the same line or not. It doesn't matter to C++. How about you didn't put in a 3. So now, if I could run this guy, I'll put in a 3. It says you put in a 3. What if I put in a 2? You didn't put in a 3. So now it does one or the other. Now what if I want to do multiple choices? So I can do something like this. Put in an if statement here. And say if it's a 4, I can say something like you put in a 4. Now what this allows me to do is if I put in a 3, it says I put in a 3. If I put in a 4, it says I put in a 4. If I put in anything else, it doesn't do anything because neither of these is the case. You're also allowed to put a final else statement on here if none of the previous conditions matched. So I could, you entered something else. Oops, there we go. So I enter a 5, and it says you enter something else. Now there's another way to do this, which is a switch statement. So another thing I could have done, if instead of all of this, so I'll leave this here so you can see, is a switch statement. This is actually available in Java as well. I don't usually teach it because if and else statements do exactly the same thing. And you can do a switch on only a certain number of data types, whereas you can always do if and else statements. So I could do a switch on the input. And I put braces around the switch statement. Then I look for a particular case. So I could do case of 3. You put in a 3. And line. And the logical thing might be to do this. You put in a 4, And then if it's neither of those, you can have something called a default case. Now this is almost right. There's one extra piece though. I'll show you what happens. So if I run this guy and put in a 5, for example, it does you entered something else, exactly like we did in the if statements here. If I get in here and I enter a 3, notice it does the 3, then the 4, and then the you entered something else all together. So once you get into a break statement and it matches a case, it actually executes every single line after that. In order to stop that, what you do is you put in a special command called a break, and that exits out of the switch statement. So I need a break after the 3, and I need a break after the 4, because otherwise it'll just keep on executing everything after that. The default is the last line, so it doesn't matter for that one. So now if I take a look at this, so I'll enter in a 3 now, and it just has the you put in a 3. Now you can only do switches on ints and chars as a general matter of course. Floats don't work, for example. So that's one of the reasons I would generally always use an if and else statements. All right, so what if we want to do something a little more complex than this if statement up here? So killing lines. It sounds so deadly. All right. Now it may be that I want to do something where if it's a 3 or it is a 4, if either one of those is true, I want to do something. So how do I check for combinations of things? So I can do 2 vertical bars for a logical OR statement. So now I no longer need this part here, and I could say you put in a 3 or a 4. And it's even possible you put in both, by the way. So if somehow magically you could do a 3 and a 4 at the same time, that would also be true. So if an if statement, the way it works with a logical OR, which is these 2 vertical bars, is if this side is true, or this side is true, or they are both true, it will execute this line of code. The only time it does not do the inside of the if statement is if both of them are false. Now what if you want 2 conditions to be true in order to do that? So if I put in 2 ampersands, which is this symbol here, that is logical AND, which means both of these 2 statements must be true. And by the way, this statement will never be true because you're never going to input both a 3 and a 4. But one thing I can do besides this is I can say, what if it's greater than or equal to 3? This is how you say greater than or equal to. And what if it's less than or equal to 4? So now if I enter a 3 or a 4, that will also work. And I could equally say, if the input is between a 3 and a 5, then I say you put in a number between 3 and 5. So just to show you I'm not lying, 4. That worked. I didn't need to recompile that. Oh well. 2. You entered something else. So this allows me to combine statements together. Now what if I want to have it do something that is not within this range? Another way I could do it is to say greater than. So if I could say if it's less than 3 or it's greater than 5, and that would allow me to do something outside of that range. However, another way I could do it is to leave this, put parentheses around this whole thing, and use the exclamation point, which is not. So if I say not this whole thing, so this will evaluate to true or false, and the not command makes it the opposite. So if it was false, it becomes true. If it was true, it becomes false. By the way, if you ever get the way that true and false works is that if you ever get something that is 0 in this evaluation, that is considered false. If there's anything that is not 0, that is considered true, just for future reference. The true and false is basically those commands. So now, if I could do this guy, you entered something else. Well, technically I entered the 3. This would become true normally, but then I made it the opposite, so it becomes false, so it goes out to the else statement. So I'm actually printing out the opposite of what I wanted. Let's see if that's actually true. Oh, this is going to always be true, I just realized, because if a number is 1, it will be this part, which is always true. If it's greater than 3, it will be this part. And that's not a very useful if statement. Let's do it this way. If it's between those two, it must be between those two to be valuable. There we go. All right. So if both of these are true, so if it's within that range, then make it the opposite. One other thing I should mention real quick is I used 2 equal signs earlier when using comparisons. That is very, 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 very important and very easy to miss. If you are checking to see if 2 things are equal, so if this variable input is exactly the same value as this 3 in an if statement, and actually in while statements later on and for loops, you must use 2 equal signs. So keep in mind, this is a valid line of code. This assigns the 3 into the variable input, which means that that actually is an assignment, which is valid, and it can go inside of an if statement, but that's almost never what you want. Almost always what you want is 2 equal signs. I always think of it as kind of a balance. If these 2 things weigh the same on this balance of 2 equal signs, then they're the same. All right, now that we have some basic if statements, let's move on to loops.